Welcome students to the online NPTEL course Contemporary Architecture and Design. In the previous two classes we have discussed the before part of this contemporary architecture and design, which was the pre-industrial revolution. So we have started discussing with the classical architecture, and then the Renaissance, what happened after Renaissance and till industrial revolution. We have discussed about the art and design movement, especially art movements, as well as the parallel architecture movements till that time. So the previous two lecture was to give you the backdrop of what happened just before contemporary architecture and design started. So which is the timeline starts from the industrial revolution, which is 19th century onwards. And today we will discuss about the industrial revolution, so which is an phenomena in 19th century which started in Europe. And this actually happened based on the what started in the Renaissance. After Renaissance, a lot of things changed, so that was a paradigm shift from there. And from Renaissance, a lot of advancement in art and as well as in technology started, and which went to the peak in just before the industrial revolution. And because of all this things started accumulated, and this industrial revolution started, and from Europe there was a boom in the industrial revolution. People started migrating from village to the city, and then many of the countries started colonialization, so they started going to the different countries and occupying the land. So that was the phenomena. And then we know that World War and other things happened, so which was part of the contemporary, the simultaneously which was going during the contemporary part, which was when the modernism was going on in architecture and design. So this is the timeline we have discussed till now. So we start with the classical architecture, Greek and Roman, to the early Christian, Byzantine, Romanesque and Gothic. And then in 14th century to 17th century there was this European Renaissance. During that time Renaissance architectures and art started flourishing. Then Mannerism, Baroque and Rococo, again it went high on ornamentation. So from total construction based architecture to high ornate architecture, which is Gothic. Then in Renaissance we have seen that low ornamentation, mostly geometric style, which was Renaissance. And then again went up to the Baroque Rococo style, which was high on ornamentation. Then a total paradigm shift started in the industrial revolution. So this part generally we discuss in the history of architecture, history of art, history of design. And then from this time onwards, which is mostly 1920s onwards, we start talking about the contemporary architecture, art and design. So contemporary has two parts, which is modern as well as the postmodern. So modern is mostly the time frame was during the World War I and World War II, and that has a particular visual style. And the postmodern is a little different when the World War stopped, and a different visual style started emerging because of the reaction against the modernist movement, as well as the socio-cultural context was quite different. But still we will see this modernism and postmodernism can be combined, and it is very different from the design and art movement which happened during the happened before the industrial revolution. So there are some social contexts which changed during the 19th century industrial revolution. First, this post-Renaissance art and technology advancement was there. So we have a lot of advancement in art as well as the technology. So the new technology, advancement of new material, for example the usage of steel, glass, these things started coming in 19th century. It was the it got evolved because of this 19th century industrial revolution. So new material was there, new technology to handle this material was there, and the art style changed because there was a total different style in the pre-industrial revolution. There was a emphasis on the craftsmanship of people, the artisans and local artisans. Then because of this new advancement of technology, that also impacted on the change of art style, because mass production was required, and then people started migrating from the village to city. New type of house and new type of buildings was required. Before that, the buildings were in village mostly, and if we go to the history of architecture, mostly we see the architectural marvels comes from cathedral, castles, and fortresses, and mostly cathedral was quite an important part of it. And now because of this industrial revolution, new typology of buildings started emerging, for example, railway station, office buildings, and high-rise buildings. So their visual style will definitely be different. And then because of the new technology, mass production, and other advancement of technology, new materials, and then people started using metal and glass, so that will change the art style as well. So we will discuss, we will see how this affected the modernist and postmodern design when we discuss step by step and each and every phases of modernism and postmodernism. So some social context was people started migrating from agriculture to industry because of the boom in the industry, migration of people from village to city. So there was new working people, so there even the fashion and everything changed because of the working class people of men as well as women. And then increase of production of steel as well as the other new material, different metals and glass. A shift towards the functionality, because residential, recreational, commercial buildings like factory, housing and markets were more important, and before that it was the preference was over cathedral and churches, which we have seen from this. If we study Greek architecture, we see Parthenon. In Roman architecture, we see recreational buildings were there, but it was completely different, like Colosseum, and then public buildings were there like Parthenon and other Pantheon and other places. But in Gothic, we see a lot of examples in cathedrals and other things. So mostly it was confined into the cathedrals and fortresses. So in the evolution of new school of thought in 19th century industrial revolution, there was a dilemma between the old traditional style and the craftsmanship. So earlier the design style used to be mostly handcrafted, artisan used to do it, and each and every piece was different, and because it was handmade, and artisan used to make it. And the new invention, which is material and technology, that changed the visual style because of the new material and the new technology, use of steel and glass. And the other thing is the provision of mass production, the factory production, because factory used to give provision of mass production, which can create a mini replica of the same thing in much lesser time, so the cost of this product comes down. The old style can't be incorporated in the steel structure, because we see when a steel building, that definitely should look different from the old style building, which is made out of the load bearings brick or stone. The prefabrication and mass production versus craftsmanship was also a stylistic and technological differences. So the crisis in architecture, art and design generated because of this new material, new technology, and the provision of this all this new advancement cannot match with the previous visual style, because they cannot give something which looks like the previous style. So the visual style has to change. So that's why we see the modern buildings, the contemporary buildings, which is modern as well as the postmodern, they look drastically different from the pre-industrial revolution buildings. So after that, the postmodern industrial revolution, there was a neoclassical, after neoclassical, which was just before post-industrial, the industrial revolution, and then before modern, there was two different things, because there's right now we see a dilemma in art, architecture and design. So one style was what was there before is the traditional craftsmanship, and another is new technology. So two opposite style, opposite way and opposite paradigm is there right now. And then so in that situation, the designers, architect and the artist, they will it is a common notion that somebody will support the traditional, stick to the traditional craftsmanship, traditional style of visual language and traditional technology, and some architect and designer started accepting the new technology. So when this thing happens, then a totally polarized and two different style evolved. So that two different style, we cannot call this a particular, we cannot put that in the particular umbrella, because that's opposite. And this is what the pre-modern style is. So one is the against the machine movement, which went against the machine, which supported the traditional craftsmanship and did not support the new technology. Another is for the machine movement, which embraces the new technology, new tools and techniques and new style of design. So totally polarized and totally two different style evolved, and that is the pre-modern style. So we cannot club it in a particular design style. So one type of one set of architect, designer and artist, they say that this is the new technology, this gives us a lot of provision to experiment with the new visual style, let's go for this. And another architect and designer said we should preserve our traditional style. So the aesthetic emphasis was there in the traditional craftsmanship, and then which went for the against the machine movement, and for the machine movement there was new technology and function was emphasized. So we will discuss this. This is one is for the machine movement, one is against the machine movement. In against the machine movement, there are two things: art and craft movement and art nouveau. We'll discuss all this visual style and all these movements in the later style. But from these two style, now modernism has to come together, because when the modernist movement started, modernist movement also had three phases of modernism. The early modern style, we will see lot of different modernist movement evolved, which is like Bauhaus, Art Deco, Chicago School and organic, few movements which are quite different from each other. So they some movement like Art Deco supports the aesthetic emphasis, and they are quite high on visual elements, and some movement like Bauhaus is very functional. So different fragmented movements were there, because they emerged from two different opposite pole of opposite school of thought. So modernism somehow lies in between, and in the first phase they were somewhere here in the different movements, and gradually they started coming to somewhere in between, which encompasses both the positive side of machine made aesthetics, the provision of mass production, and also it has some values taken from the aesthetic value, and it changed the aesthetic style and visual style changed over the modernist, how the modernism phase is going on. So from the first phase onwards, first phase to second phase and third phase, second phase and third phase has much more visual simile between the different movements, but in first phase there were a lot of difference in the visual style. So this is the first phase, which is Bauhaus. Art Deco was part of the first phase. Bauhaus is more towards the machine movement, and functionality was much more emphasized. Art Deco has a lot of visual elements which comes which has a connection with the Art Nouveau, which is against the machine movement, and also it has it takes something from the Baroque Rococo style, which comes which is part of the pre-industrial revolution movement. Now we see organic, where the design elements are coming from the context, and the visual elements are coming from the context, like Hollyhock design and other things which Frank Lloyd Wright does, and a lot of emphasis is there in the visual style as well as the functionality. So it's a blend of both. And then we see internationalism, which is in the second phase, and where we see a blend of, there is a visual style, but that visual style comes from a totally machine movement, and functionality is also there, new technology is there. So it is part, it's quite close to the machine movement. And then tensile and shell structure, brutalism, metabolism, these are the movements which comes in the later phases of modernism, which has tensile and shell structure. If you see, so they take positive point of the new technology, the shell, concrete shell, and steel tensile structure, but that looks that is quite sculptural, and it also has a sculptural value, and as well as this has the structure comes from the new advancement of the technology. So this is the timeline of modernism. We will discuss this in detail. So this is the pre-modern style, the post-industrial revolution, just after post-industrial revolution, which is just before the modernism. So modernism starts from here, phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3, it ends over here, and then postmodernism starts, which is almost like 1920s to 1980s. So there is no particular hard and fast timeline that it starts from 1920s and it ends at 1980s. It continues, and then some blend is also there. During postmodern era, some modernist movement was also there. So for the machine movement, as we are saying, which embraces the machine aesthetics, and against the machine movement, which embraces the oppose the machine aesthetic, which is and two movement was there, art and craft movement and art nouveau. We will discuss this. And then in modernism phase 1, one set of movement was emphasizing on the functionalism of the building, because a new set of buildings like railway station, college and school buildings, high-rise buildings, office buildings requires functionality at the foremost priority. So Chicago School of Thought, which is American movement mostly, and then Bauhaus School, which is European movement mostly, is part of the functionalism. Then organic and prairie. Organic is part of the bigger umbrella of Prairie School of Architecture, Prairie School of Thought, which takes the context from the local it's American movement, so it takes the prairie land of America's style and then manifests that. Organic is also talks about the contextually designing the things. And Art Deco is connected with the Art Nouveau, but it also embraces the provision of machine aesthetics. Now from internationalism, modernism kind of because here a lot of fragmented design thoughts were there, visual style was there, but from internationalism there was one holistic style, which they thought that so many different movements in different country, different continent might not work, so we should have a particular visual style which will be followed internationally. From that school of thought, from that idea, internationalism started, and which does not talk about the context, which has a particular visual style which emphasizes steel, glass and the new material, new technology, and mostly this is very geometric. So this internationalism flourished in the phase 2, and there are monolithic forms which emphasizes on the form and the new technology. Now in the phase 3 onwards, with this technology there was again some aesthetics that they wanted to explore the sculptural quality with the new technology. So a tensile, which is based on steel structure and the fabric, and shell, which is based on the concrete structure. So that structural excellence gives the form of this building. So there's a form and function has the equal emphasis in the this design. So which is late modern, ultra modern, some Vugi architecture and other architecture style also evolved. Now brutalism and metabolism also blends the function as well as the form. So brutalist architecture talks about the material, which is concrete. So brutalism comes from the concrete, exposed concrete and exposed brick structure, that gives the aesthetics of the brutalism, and it looks robust and it looks very heavy in visual style. Metabolism talks about the services becomes the aesthetics part. We will discuss it, but this there is an aesthetic element added to it, and which comes from the services, which is also the new technology, and that they wanted to show as the building facade. So there is again form and function, both the functionality of services and the form, all the things are coming together. So now if we see this design style, which we have already and if we compare that with the previous art and design movements, architecture movements, we will see that there is one design movement, there was a lot of emphasis in the functionality and the technology, and the next movement might be something which is again emphasizing on the aesthetic value. So form and function, sometimes in some movement form becomes very important, and in the next movement function becomes very important. So if we see the previous architectural movements also, we can see that. So we will discuss this in due course, but let's see the buildings which is related to this a timeline. So we have seen for the machine movement. So this is a Crystal Palace which is going to it is under the for the machine movement. So you can see all this steel and concrete members which forms the structural creates the structure is actually creating the aesthetics part, and this looks machine made, and this is the truss, and this all these members, steel functional members, are actually the aesthetic elements. So this is and this building does not look like something which is before pre-industrial revolution. And the other opposite movement is against the machine movement. This is part of Art Nouveau. This is Antonio Gaudi's design. We will discuss Art Nouveau in detail as well. So here if we see the minaret and minaret-like structure and the roof. So this cannot be machine made. This is every curvature is different, and if we look at the facade treatment and all these elements, this is totally handcrafted, and this emphasizes on the traditional craftsmanship, and it is highly dependent on the artists and architects and designers skill. So this is totally opposite to a movement. Now here, when we start the modernism in phase one is Bauhaus, which is totally functional. So you can see a very box like structure, and if we look at the color composition, so there's only primary color red, you can see yellow, there's blue inside, and the overpowering color is the color of the material, which is glass, which does not have any which is translucent, and the steel members, which is colored black, and gray, white and black, which is the achromatic colors are there. Now this is an example of Prairie School of Architecture. So this is Robbie House by Frank Lloyd Wright, and here you can see the these lines and everything is derived from the prairie grassland. We will see, we will discuss how this has a connection with the context, but this has a this style of design talks about the aesthetic value as well. Now this is Art Deco, and here we can see a lot of ornamentation is there. But if you look at the ornamentation, and also this talks about the arches, which different arches on top of other growing arches. So this has a connection with the pre-industrial revolution. So they are taking some design elements, emphasis from there. But if we look at it, so this talks about the machine aesthetics. So mostly when we look at the Art Deco visual design, posters, there are a lot of typefaces and graphic design as well as the architecture. So we see a lot of emphasis on the metallic color, but there are a lot of emphasis on the aesthetics as well. So it has a connection with the Art Nouveau as well, but there is a provision of, and they are encompassing they are embracing the provision of mass production. So there is a blend of for the machine and against the machine movement as well. So it's together. So this is internationalism, and this comes in the in between phase 1 and phase 2. So mostly in phase 2, and it continues. So this is Villa Savoye by Le Corbusier, and some other buildings by other architects, Oscar Niemeyer's building. So this has this is internationalism. So you can see geometric elements, but there is emphasis on the form as well, but you see a lot of emphasis on the new technology. Now new technology here, this is a concrete structure, it's an airport by Eero Saarinen. So this concrete shell structure gives a beautiful form of a flying bird. So here the structure comes from the structural functionality, and the form is also important. So this is an example of brutalism and as well as the metabolism. So from outside, this is exposed brick, so brick brutalism, and you see a lot of services are outside. So this is also a service. This is a staircase. This is a staircase, and this is some of these are staircases, some of these are wind shafts. So all these are services, which is quite prominent. So there's a visual style is coming from the new technology. After that, the post-industrial, postmodernism starts. So in art and design also the similar thing happened. So this is for the machine movement. So all these different type of machines comes in the post-industrial revolution movement. New and you know that new a type of new equipment, new tools and tools and equipments started coming. This is Kodak's first portable camera. So there was camera before, which is huge in size, but this is a portable camera, which again is a very it's a total square, and that talks about the geometry, and that's also a style of for the machine movement. And the first cars, and you can if you see that those type of designs were part of this for the machine movement. And another is this is Alfonso Mucha's painting, which is which comes under Art Nouveau again, which is parallel to Antonio Gaudi's this design. So here also we see a lot of different kind of lines which cannot be mass produced, and this looks totally like hand painted, but it is not exactly not has a lot of differences from the pre-industrial revolution movement, but it is totally dependent on the craft the quality of handwork and the dependent on the artist. So and all these different kind of lines, biomorphic lines, are called whiplash lines, which looks like a whip's lash, and they are different and from each other, and all these treatments are different from each other. So this is part of Art Nouveau movement, and it's high on ornamentation. So this is this style movement, which is parallel to Bauhaus movement. We have seen this Bauhaus design. We will see the similarity with the Bauhaus and the De Style movement. De Style is an art movement, but still you can see the color palette is quite a similarity, and the rectilinearity in Bauhaus, the rectilinearity in the painting. So this is Piet Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie is the name of the painting, has a lot of similarity with the Bauhaus movement. Now we have the Art Deco. So Art Deco, I was talking about this metallic colors is there, and all these are replicas of the same design, but a lot of emphasis is there on the design. This is Tamara de Olympica's painting, but if you look at the painting, they have a metallic shine, and this car and everything, this is part of it. You can break that in geometry, and metallic style is there. Now this is also there in the, and this is part of this. You can see this is contemporary to the Bauhaus movement, when the functionalism was there and there was no mix of different visual style. So either it is rectilinear, for example here it's all rectilinear and primary color, or it will be totally circular. So this is a car, this is Ford Mustang, designed by Ford. This car has all rectilinear lines. People started designing these cars from industrial revolution. So first cars will have different parts will look different. So if the car's bonnet is there, so some headlight will be attached, the different parts will be assembled, and the car will be a mix and match of different elements, and it will not have a very holistic visual style. But here in the Ford Mustang, everything is rectilinear. Every line, if you look at these lines, those are all parallel lines, and everything is emphasizing on the rectilinearity of the design. Now this Ford Mustang car comes in red, yellow, and mostly and blue, and white and black. So these are primary colors and achromatic colors. Now there is another car which became very popular during that time, which is Volkswagen Beetles. If you see Volkswagen Beetles, everything is circular, so there is no mix with the rectilinearity with the circularity. So Volkswagen Beetles, if I break down into very simple geometry, so it will have this. This is a very simplistic drawing of that Volkswagen Beetle. So all these elements which will be which is part of the Volkswagen Beetles has this circularity. It is throughout the Beetle's design. And Beetle also comes in primary colors, which is yellow, become very famous. Yellow, red, white, black, these are the Beetle's colors, but yellow is one of the popular. Yellow and red was popular Beetle's color, which is again primary color. Now there are different other art movements, which is like this is Van Gogh's Starry Night, which is part of the Impressionism movement. So here the technology is the way of drawing is way of painting is quite different. So this is called impasto style. We will discuss this. So it's it has a thick color, and this has a tactile texture on the canvas. So this style of art is also quite different from the pre-industrial revolution. This is an abstraction started coming. So this is a cubist painting by Pablo Picasso, Guernica. So this abstraction and different tools and techniques applying in art also started started flourishing. And also if we look at the building also become quite abstract, because when it fits into a geometric shape, which is like a dome, which is part of a sphere or total box or cylinder, then also it becomes abstract. And there is another movement which is streamlining, which is quite similar to the because the ergonomic factors and streamline cars, which you can will discuss, and other product design talks about the ergonomics. In case of cars, they talk about the aerodynamics, and then the total design has a lot of fluidity, so as this tensile and shell structure. So those were a kind of parallel movements in architecture as well and design. So now we see in the modernism also we see from the post-industrial revolution. One is if I plot which is high on ornamentation, and this is low on ornamentation. So post-industrial revolution, high on ornamentation, and this is mostly functional, and low ornamentation. So high ornamentation was against the machine movement, low ornamentation was for the machine movement. Now in phase 1, if we look at low ornamentation was Bauhaus and Chicago, and then high ornamentation somewhere here was Organic and Prairie, and very high ornamentation was Art Deco. So this is Art Nouveau and art and craft movement. This is Art Deco. Now again internationalism comes low on ornamentation. Now again the shell structure. Here the shell structure again has the high ornamentation. So low ornamentation, high ornamentation, again low ornamentation here, high ornamentation, low ornamentation, and again high ornamentation. So this is going like a sine curve. So again in the tensile and shell we can see there's a lot of ornamentation, and which comes from the structure, but still there's a lot of ornamentation. And then in metabolism there's a blend with the technology and the ornamentation. Now after this postmodern, we will see again a rise of ornamentation, because mostly in modernism this internationalism was the high modern, and this flourished a lot in the modernism movement. So in postmodernism we will see again a high ornamentation. So it's always goes like a shift with the low ornamentation and high ornamentation. Now if we look at the pre-industrial revolution, which is before modern and postmodern, Greek Roman architecture style, we see a lot of emphasis on the structure. So the building comes from the structural stability. So we see in Colosseum and Pantheon the dome shapes, and here we see the trabeated structure, and that is what the design was. Now after few movements like Byzantine and early Christian, we see Gothic, which is extremely high on ornamentation. Now we see after that we see Renaissance. Renaissance again low on ornamentation. We see the structure and a very geometric form. Now after that, after few revolution, we again go back to Baroque and Rococo, which is again high on ornamentation. Then again we go to modern. Modern in the initial stages there are different movements which which has different visual style. But if we look at the high modern, which is internationalism, was the most important and most flourished part, and phase 2 and phase 3 we see a low decrease in the ornamentation, and postmodernism we will see again a increase in the ornamentation. Now in modernism and postmodernism, we are clubbing this to contemporary. So there are a lot of things got agglomerated together, and then that gives us the provision of discussing modernism and postmodernism together under the umbrella of contemporary. So a lot of change was there. So two major change was, one is the discontinuity in the technology. Technology totally changed. So this is the previous technology was, if you look at the stone buildings and brick buildings were there, and concrete was used as a mortar to as a binding material. So that we see, and the style in art was quite detailed, and there was a figurative style, and also the technique of art changed. So we were talking about the Van Gogh style. So this is impasto, or the applying the color in a thick color. So this technology of the way of painting changed. Also, if we look at the Art Nouveau movements and Art Deco movements, the style of art also, the application of technology in design also, it changed. Now here we see a lot of emphasis on the new material, which is concrete, the glass, and the provision of a huge cantilever. Everything was quite different, and the new material is also there in the product design. So also the discontinuity in the visual style. Earlier we see in the pre-industrial evolution, a lot of figurative element, figurative style of design is there, and now in the contemporary we see abstract form was getting more and more emphasized. So this is a girl with the pearl earring by Vermeer, and if we look at, so there is a lot of chiaroscuro style and ornamentation, and different things were there, which will vary from the pre-industrial evolutions with different art and design movement, but still we'll see a very figurative depiction of a particular element. So it will look like what it looks like in the natural setup. So there was no breaking, and there's not much breaking into the visual style of how it looks. When we look at this Botticelli's Venus, there is a lot of stylistic change. So the neck is long, and hairs does not look like natural hair, but still the depiction of this human figure looks like an human figure. But here this is Edvard Munch's Cream, and the human face does not look like this. So this is an expression of an artist. And if we look at other paintings like Van Gogh's Starry Night, the night sky does not look like this. This is an abstraction of this night sky. And even if we look at Picasso's other painting, like Van Gogh's painting was Starry Night, and Picasso's painting, and Salvador Dali's design, the setup of the painting, they don't look like the modern, the exact way people perceive. So these are some of the palette of art, architecture, and design. So these are from this pre-industrial revolution, and this side is from post-industrial revolution, modernism and postmodernism. So we see different medias and different in architecture, art, and design, everything was quite figurative. So this is the sculpture, in case of sculpture, in case of print media, in case of painting, everything was figurative. In case of architecture also, the ornamentations in Rococo style was figurative. And in architecture, all these elements which we see has this floral design, and the roofs which looks like the traditional architectural form, and this has this there's no much geometry, they're not there's no intention of putting the form into a pure geometry. When we put things into the pure geometry, that becomes more abstract in nature. So in a Bauhaus, we see a pure geometry, which is man-made geometry, encompasses the built form. And so as in the art, so as in the sculpture, this is Noguchi's sculpture in New York. And so as in the product design, we see our seating place is broken in pure geometric shapes, and that creates the seating space. This is marshmallow chair. We will discuss all these things. This painting has been discussed. So here also the way the colors and everything has been applied is not is abstract. And also in the Art Deco posters, Also in the furniture, things are modular and you can divide the design element in different lines, rhythm, and this creates an abstract form of design which is quite different from the pre-industrial revolution. Now this is an example of same painting, the same painting reinterpreted, a painting which is there in the pre-industrial revolution, which is Velázquez Las Meninas, is reinterpreted by Pablo Picasso, who's a cubist painter in modernist era, which is again this is called Las Meninas by Pablo Picasso. So this is in modernist style, this is in the Velázquez original painting by Las Meninas. All the elements you can see is here, even the painter himself is here. So here the chiaroscuro style, which is high on light and shadow, creates a dramatic effect, but this has this is very figurative. Everybody's face and figure looks like a human being, but this has been broken in the pure geometric form and abstract form, and the painter is but every pupil, all the people, all the animals are here in this both the paintings, but based on their importance, they have broken into the abstraction. So this element, this human being here does not come in the focal point. So he have just created few lines for this, and here there's a lot of chiaroscuro effect for this king who's entering in the setup, has emphasis, and this is the main princess who's in the focal point, has created has some detail here, but again in the abstraction. So this figurative to abstraction, this change is there in art, architecture, and design. So the next class onwards we'll start discussing of about different architecture and art movement of modernism and postmodernism. Thank you.